Agamemnon, the absolute king of the Greek hierarchy, tries to conquer all the lands in order to dominate, and on many occasions, he wants to have the help of Achilles, the best warrior in Greece, with whom he has many differences and a very tense relationship, for say the least. At the same time, in Sparta a party is held in the palace of Menelaus, Agamemnon's younger brother, where Prince Hector of Troy and his younger brother Paris are guests, to consolidate peace between Spartans and Trojans. Everything seems to be going well between the representatives of both kingdoms, but Hector realizes that Paris is having an affair with Helen, wife of Menelaus, whom he convinces to go with him to Troy. The next morning the two princes leave at dawn, and after an emotional conversation, Paris reveals to Hector that he has sneaked Helen into the ship, which angers Hector, since he knows that the Spartans will go after her, and that this will cause a war between Greece and Troy. Menelaus discovers that Helen has fled with the Trojans and, enraged, he reunites with his brother Agamemnon, whom he asks for help to conquer Troy and take Helen. Agamemnon accepts, delighted by his desire to gain absolute control of the Aegean Sea. However, his friend Nestor tells him that Troy has never been conquered due to his powerful force. The city itself is protected by high walls and is assumed to be prepared to maintain a siege for a period of 10 years, so he recommends that he seek the support of Achilles and his Myrmidons from the Achaean territories. Agamemnon knows that he and Achilles hate each other, so he sends Odysseus, king of Ithaca, to try to convince him to join the cause of Greece and bring the Myrmidons with him as his great allies in this war. When Odysseus manages to find Achilles' whereabouts, he finds himself training with his cousin Patroclus, who turns out to be a promising apprentice in combat, and works hard to be a Myrmidon. At first, Achilles, with a very proud character, refuses Odysseus' requests due to his exacerbated hatred against Agamemnon, but finally he feels quite convinced by the honor and glory that he will bring throughout Greece, and agrees to participate in the war when his mother predicts that, although he will die in Troy, his name and strong deeds will be remembered forever. In Troy, Hector, Paris and Helen receive a great welcome from the Trojans. King Priam receives Helen kindly, but then speaks alone with Hector to decide what to do with her. Hector insists that the smart thing to do would be to return Helen to Sparta, but Priam dismisses her idea, believing that if they did, Paris would go after her and Menelaus would kill him. Finally, the king decides to confront the Greeks when they arrive, trusting that his people will remain alive thanks to the superiority of Troy, its great walls and the strength granted by the god Apollo. 2 days later, more than 1,000 ships full of warriors from all over Greece, of diverse origins, Athenians, Thebans, Corinthians, Macedonians and even Spartans, appear off the coast of Troy. The Trojans respond as quickly as possible. The beach has fortified positions, where the defenders place archers, while the army mobilizes in the city, which can take several hours. The first ship that reaches the coast is that of Achilles and his Myrmidons, wishing to monopolize the glory of the battle, while the other ships are at a considerable distance, so he plans to take the beach of Troy with only 50 men. They are greeted with a volley of arrows and quickly suffer casualties, but Achilles orders his men to form a shield wall, and they begin to advance slowly towards the fortified positions, where the archers are. Once they arrive, they break their formation and the Greeks begin to massacre the Trojan defenders with great ease, despite being heavily outnumbered. Hector, seeing that it will take hours for the army to mobilize for battle, leads a group of cavalry to support the defenders on the beach. Meanwhile, Ajax's ship rushes in to reinforce Achilles and his men, so the Greek advance continues. Achilles heads with his men to a temple dedicated to Apollo, in the vicinity of the beach. After being taken, Hector and his forces arrive, they dismount and enter the temple, where they are ambushed and massacred by the Greeks, leaving only Hector, whom Achilles confronts and allows to return safely to Troy, since it would be pointless to kill him without anyone else witnessing it. The rest of the Greek ships reach the coast, hailing the name of Achilles, and later setting up camp and fortifying their position against possible attacks. From the sacking of the temple, they capture a Trojan priestess named Briseis, cousin of Hector and Paris, and give her to Achilles, but Agamemnon spitefully takes her away with the intention of making her his slave. Outraged by this, Achilles decides that he and his Myrmidons will not intervene in the war, until Agamemnon implores them to do so. The next day, the enormous army of Greece appears before the walls of Troy, so Hector and Paris confront Agamemnon, Menelaus and the other Greek kings, who demand the immediate return of Helen, that Troy agree to unconditional surrender, and that the Trojan soldiers will fight for Agamemnon in exchange for respecting the lives of its inhabitants. Upon hearing Menelaus' demands, Paris feels guilty about the situation, which is why he proposes that he and the Spartan king fight in a combat to the death for the right to Helen. Eager to take revenge and counting on him to win, Menelaus accepts, but not before secretly planning with Agamemnon that the Greeks will still attack Troy as soon as Menelaus murders Paris. Menelaus humiliates and wounds an inexperienced Paris, who eventually cannot contain his fear and attempts to flee. Outraged by Paris's cowardly attitude, Menelaus prepares to kill him, but is treacherously murdered by Hector. Agamemnon, angered by the death of his brother, orders his army to advance. As the Greeks approach, they are greeted by hundreds of arrows from the Trojan archers, who shoot from the safety of their walls, causing many casualties, but they still charge against the Trojan army stationed in front of their walls, well positioned, and the battle turns into a bloody hand-to-hand combat, with a clear advantage for the Trojans. Hector faces Ajax in one-on-one combat, and with moments of hesitation, Hector ends up winning, at which point the Greek army began to crumble, with the archers firing as the Trojan soldiers began to advance, causing countless casualties. Agamemnon at first refuses to admit defeat, the first for his army, but Odysseus convinces him, and then orders the retreat to his camp, while they are pursued by the Trojans, until they enter the range of the Greek archers covering the retreat. Then Hector orders the men to stop and they return to the city. In the camp, Odysseus complains to Agamemnon that if they want to have a chance of winning the war, they must do everything possible to regain the loyalty of Achilles and his Myrmidons, for which they return Briseis, who becomes his lover. That night, the Trojan king Priam orders an attack against the demoralized Greeks, to retake the beach and expel the invaders. When the battle begins at dawn, to everyone's surprise, the Myrmidons join the Greeks in defending the camp, and both armies clash, starting a bloody hand-to-hand combat where Achilles, yes, in quotes, leads the Greek attack, while Hector does the same for the Trojans, until they face each other in single combat one-on-one, where Hector defeats him without any difficulty, being evident that he was not Achilles, but his cousin Patroclus, to whom Hector gives death. Odysseus and Hector agree to stop the fight for that day, and both sides retreat, the Trojans to their city, and the Greeks to their camp. When the real Achilles finds out that Hector has killed Patroclus, he becomes enraged, and swears that the Prince of Troy must die as revenge. The next day, Achilles appears before the walls of Troy and angrily calls Hector, who goes out to confront him, and turns out to be a worthy combatant, but even so the best warrior in Greece makes a more strategic move, and manages to launch himself in cold blood against the Prince of Troy, taking advantage of his resistance and strength, killing him with the tip of a spear, and piercing him with his sword, managing to avenge the memory of Patroclus. Then, as a warning to the Trojans, Achilles ties Hector's lifeless body by the feet to a rope, and takes it as a trophy to the Greek camp, dragging it with his chariot to the anguish of Priam and the frustration of Paris, being the latter the last one who would swear to take revenge for the death of his older brother. That same night, Priam sneaked into the Greek camp, and entered Achilles' tent, begging to be allowed to take his son's body, to give him a proper funeral. Achilles allows it, so Priam takes Hector and Briseis to Troy. Achilles promises him 12 days of truce while the mourning for Hector's death lasts. Later on, Achilles gives his Myrmidons permission to return to Greece, but he decides to stay in Troy, arguing that he has a pending battle. Upon learning of Achilles' friendly actions with Priam, Agamemnon is enraged, and claims that he will conquer Troy even if it costs him 40,000 warriors. Alarmed that Agamemnon could lead them to destruction, Odysseus comes up with a clever way to conquer the city, without more warriors dying. During the 12 days that the truce lasts, the Greeks build a large wooden horse, and hide their ships to give the impression that they have decided to leave Troy, leaving some soldiers already dead, from the plague on the beach. After the truce time runs out, Priam along with Paris and some generals go out to check the beach abandoned by the Greeks. They see the few dead soldiers and no traces of the camp, so they end up believing that Greece has finally surrendered to the superiority of Troy and has left never to return. Upon actually verifying that there is only the horse, Paris tries to convince them of destroying it, but he is not listened to and everything is left to Priam's decision. The horse is considered an offering from Greece destined for the god Poseidon, so Priam decides to introduce the horse in the city to take it to the temple. That night, when the Trojans believe that the war is over, in the center of the city, the Greeks who had hidden inside the horse, led by Odysseus, come out ready and willing to attack the sleeping sentinels. Then they give a signal with a torch and open the doors, thus allowing all the Greeks' warriors, under the command of Agamemnon, to enter the city en masse, thus beginning the sack of Troy. Andromache takes Helen and other Trojans through the tunnel that Hector showed him, but Paris decides to stay in Troy to fight and search for Briseis, who has disappeared. Thus, he gives the sword of Troy, a sword that his father had previously given him, to a young man who also flees the city, and who turns out to be Aeneas, instructing him to protect the refugees, in his absence, and find them a new home. In the sack, Priam and the general Glaucus are brutally murdered, by Agamemnon and Odysseus, respectively, while waging a final defense at the palace of Troy, but Briseis manages to suddenly kill Agamemnon. Achilles finally finds Briseis, whom he had been looking for, but before he could speak to her, Paris shoots several arrows at him, believing he was going to attack her, and also, wanting to fulfill his oath of revenge, against the one who had murdered his brother in cold blood. Achilles already feels mortal and completely weakened. Just before dying he says goodbye to Briseis, and encourages her to flee the city. Although the priestess refused to leave the city where she was born, she and Paris flee the place just before the Greeks find Achilles' lifeless body. In the end, it is seen that the few surviving Trojans, guided by Andromache and Paris, undertake the journey during the light of the new dawn, towards an unknown destination, while the Greeks, in the center of the destroyed city, carry out several funerals, by incinerating the corpses of their fallen warriors. With Odysseus being the one who takes care of the corpse of Achilles, and ends the story by mentioning how lucky he was, to coincide in time with Achilles, the best warrior of Greece, and Hector, tamer of horses.